Rich Harwood, president and founder of the Harwood Institute for Public Innovation, is an innovator, author, and speaker. For nearly 4 decades, he has devoted his career to revitalizing the nation's hardest hit communities, transforming the world's largest organizations and reconnecting institutions like school districts and newsrooms to society. He has been recruited to solve some of the most difficult problems of our time. For example, in Newtown, Connecticut, after the massacre at Sandy Hook Elementary School, Rich led the process for the community to collectively decide the fate of the school building. His innovative turning outward practice by which communities can tackle shared problems, create a culture of shared responsibility, and deepen civic faith has spread to all 50 states and 40 countries worldwide. The Harwood School makes this time-tested and high-impact approach accessible to everyone. Rich is also working deeply with iconic communities nationwide to prove that Americans have the will and ability to come together amid our real divides and build communities that work for all of us. He is an inspiring and sought-after speaker, regularly keynoting major conferences and events. He has appeared in numerous national media outlets such as NPR, the PBS NewsHour, CNN, MSNBC, the Washington Post, the New York Times, and the Wall Street Journal. And he is the best-selling author of 9 books, including his 2025 manifesto, The New Civic Path, Restoring Our Belief in One Another and Our Nation. Thank you also to the Lake Forest Public Library, that purchased all the copies of the books that are yours to take home tonight. Rich is now crisscrossing the country on his campaign for the New Civic Path to reveal a practical and more hopeful way to transform our communities and the country. I met Rich Harwood for the first time about 12, almost 13 years ago, when I became the executive director of the Oak Park Public Library. And I was invited to go to a 3-day workshop held in Washington, D.C. Didn't know anything about Rich, didn't know anything about the Harwood Institute, but on the strength of the invitation of one of my colleagues, I went. And I tell people to this day that it completely transformed my thinking about the way I work as a professional, as a librarian, as a leader, and how I thought about the ways that we negotiate and connect with our communities. And today I serve on the board of directors for the Harwood Institute for Public Innovation, and I work as a coach for the Institute with all the other amazing people from the organization. He is one of my heroes, and I think by the end of the evening you won't have to ask why. Please welcome Rich Harwood.
Thanks for coming. I guess well.
Rich, why did you write the New Civic Path, and why do you call it a manifesto?
You know, back in 2025, I was crisscrossing the country on a different campaign called Enough Time to Build. We'd come out of COVID. We realized that a lot of community leaders and citizens in the country were exhausted. We had a sigh of relief that we thought the worst was over, but I think when a lot of people looked up, they realized that actually the work was just beginning in this country. The inequities and disparities had grown, they didn't diminish. Divisions in the country had widened, they didn't diminish. The challenges in our country had simply piled up, and there was much work to be done. As I crisscrossed the country, I went to places that were both red and blue and purple. So I went to Jim Jordan's congressional district, you know, the co-founder of the Freedom Caucus. I went to Lauren Boebert's congressional district in Colorado. I went to Matt Gaetz's congressional district in the Panhandle of Florida. I went to Selma, Alabama, and keynoted the NAACP conference there. I went to Flint, Michigan, where I'd worked 25 years earlier and went back. And what was interesting about that campaign that we were undertaking was that no matter where I went, no matter who people were planning to vote for in the 2026 election, or who they ultimately voted for, I couldn't tell who was a Republican and who was a Democrat. What I could tell was that people were tired of a country that was veering increasingly towards cruelty and away from decency. What I found was that people were tired of the fact that we were not exercising dignity for all people. We were giving lip service to it at best. What I found was that people were fatigued and exhausted by the division and acrimony in our country. And what I also found was that while people wanted to figure out how to move forward, they didn't know how to do it. They didn't know what path to take. So while I was on this campaign in 2025, I decided to write this book at the same time. And when the book came out, we decided to call it a manifesto. You know, I'll just say this really quickly. We associate, at least today, manifestos with political candidates. And what was working on this campaign back in 2025 and is working today is that people want an apolitical message from an apolitical messenger, right? We want an apolitical message from an apolitical messenger. And so we decided to write a manifesto, and as you know, a manifesto is simply a public statement, an argument about how we can move forward in a different way. But we didn't want to write a political one, we wanted to write a civic one that said to us that we need to come together as Americans, not as Republicans and Democrats or as independents, but as Americans to take control of our country and shape its future and make sure it works for all of us, not just for some of us. And so that's the basis of the book. It's the basis of this campaign for the new Civic Path. And I think it needs to be part of the basis for how we move forward as Americans in this country.
And in the book, you talk about a crisis of belief. What does that mean? How did you come to the conclusion that we have a crisis of belief in this country?
Talk to any American in the country, in any community across this country, and they will tell you that they have lost faith in a sense of belief in our institutions, that we have lost a sense of belief in our leaders, that we have lost a sense of belief. I'm a person of faith, that we have lost our belief in many faith organizations and institutions, that we have lost a sense of belief in too many communities, in too many places, in civic organizations, because they have now adopted practices that look like politics and political organizations at the expense of our common interests and our shared interests. We have lost faith in this country in one another. And we've lost faith in many respects in ourselves. Think about it. How many of you, as Thanksgiving approaches, how many of you are worried about the wrong topic coming up at Thanksgiving or over the Christmas holidays or other holidays that you might be celebrating? Because the folks that you've invited to your home or whose home you're going to will get into an argument that you won't be able to manage. And it'll become acrimonious and divisive at the very time that you want people to come together. How many? We can't talk to our own family and friends anymore about these issues. And so I do believe that there's a crisis of belief. And one last thing I'll say about this, it didn't start with the election of this president. I don't care who you voted for in the last election. We went from Obama to Trump to Biden to Trump. That should tell us something. But even more than that, I've been tracking trends in America for 40 years now. And the trends that we're seeing today started 40, 50 years ago. They didn't just start 5 years ago or 10 years ago or even 12 years ago. There is something inherently and intrinsically off about our culture in this country. There's a lot of goodness, which is what I'm going to spend most of the time talking about tonight, about the intrinsic and inherent goodness in people that still exists. As human beings, we haven't changed. The conditions around us have changed. But these conditions have been changing for 40 years. So we've got a heap of a mess that we've got to get out of, and we've got to get to work and stop complaining about it and wallowing in despair and get to work. We've got some work we got to do as Americans.
So let's think about and talk about that word faith for a moment. So in addition to talking about a civic path, you have talked, I've heard you talk a lot about rebuilding civic faith. And when some people hear that word, they get a little nervous.
Yeah.
So what do you mean, and how do you explain to people what you mean when you say civic faith and rebuilding civic faith?
So for the work at the Institute that we've been doing now for nearly 40 years, we realized that there was a philosophy underpinning the work that we were doing. And just in short order, it has, to make it really practical, five different components. To me, civic faith means that we put people and communities at the center of what we do. Not our programs, not our fundraising, not our metrics, but people and communities. Now, that sounds like an easy thing to do, but actually in today's world, it's not so easy because we're actually pursuing our own interests and our own organized interests at the expense of people and communities a lot of times, right? I believe that civic faith is about a belief that people have innate capabilities, no matter what community you live in, no matter how much money you have, no matter what kind of car you drive. We all have innate capabilities. We all have talents and resources to contribute to our society, both large and small. And I think we need to find ways to tap into those innate capabilities. I believe that hope is a choice, and that too often we're peddling false hope in society, but there is something called authentic hope that we can actually engender in ourselves and one another. And I think at the heart of civic faith is that. I think at the heart of civic faith is a notion that community needs to be, I keep telling my mother not to call me these things. I believe civic faith is about making community a common enterprise. You know, as human beings, we're meant to go together. We're not meant to live apart, meant to live alone. And yet we have an epidemic of loneliness in this country. We've got to find ways amid our differences to realize that we've got to work together. We've got to find our shared interests amid those differences. And we need people pulling in the same direction. And it's got to be for all of us, not just for some of us. In too many communities, there are too many people being left out and left behind. And lastly, I think civic faith is about community being a covenant, that we're in relationship with one another. This is not simply about technical solutions to challenges. There are human dilemmas at stake here. And I think much of the challenge we face today is a human dilemma and a cultural dilemma, not simply a political dilemma, which is how our politicians and the news media and social media would like to lead us to believe is at the crux of all this. I think it's cultural and a human dilemma.
One of the most, for me, one of the most powerful images that you often leave in my mind, and again, I've heard you mention this many times in your conversations about rebuilding civic faith, is the image of the tent open on all four sides. Why is that image such a powerful one for you to use, do you think?
Well, the image comes from the Bible. Some of you know, Abraham had a tent, and it didn't have an opening, like a door. Actually, all four flaps were open all the time. And Abraham, if you know about the story, Abraham was stationed at the edge of the tent, always looking for the stranger, always looking for someone who was left out, always looking for someone who had decided to come in. I think in communities, we need to learn how to pitch tents that have all four sides open, where everyone is welcome, where we need each other to do the work that needs to get done in the community. It doesn't mean that we're all going to be ready to go. We're all not ready to go, right? We don't have enough trust. We don't have the relationships we need. We don't have the leaders that we need. We don't have the organizations that can pull us together. So I do believe, and I know we'll talk about this, but I do believe that in communities, we've got to set in motion a series of actions that help us develop our confidence that we can actually create change together. And that requires going with the folks who are ready to roll. But in the meantime, we've got to keep the tent open for those who want to join over time. Look, in Owensboro, Kentucky, I'm being followed around by the far right for the work that we're doing. We are apolitical, but I'm being followed around by the far right. They're doing research on all the work we've done across the country. I'm about to go give a speech in Owensboro in a couple of weeks. They're going to come out again and follow me around. And I will insist that I go up and shake each one of their hands. I will make sure that they know that they're welcome in this work over time. We will keep reaching out to them. The burden is on us, is on me and the folks I'm working with to keep reaching back and saying, despite what you're saying about us, there's still a place for you here in the work. In another community, I'm being followed by folks on the far left. And it's the same process. And so I think if we want to do work differently in the country, in our communities, then we have to model a way to do it and live by what we're actually proposing to do, which is to ensure that there's space for and room for people to come together, that we're going to listen to one another. We're not going to allow anyone to abridge one another's dignity, but we're going to try to find ways to work together and move forward. And we're not going to wait for everyone, because we've got to get moving on the challenges that we face in communities. So that's why I think this notion of this open tent is so important. You've got to get that image in your mind, because it means we've got to operate in a different way.
And all the different places that you go and travel, and all the different people from different beliefs and walks of life and political persuasions that you talk to, how do you convince them? Because many of them are already convinced that what you're describing is not possible. We can't do it. We can't work that way for whatever reason. How do you convince them that framework, that way of thinking about the work is even possible?
I think you have to demonstrate proof. We have a crisis of belief, so we have to start from the point of view that people aren't necessarily going to believe what we're talking about. Some will, but a lot won't. So in a place like Reading, Pennsylvania, where we've been doing work, which about 10 or 15 years ago was declared the poorest community in America. It was once predominantly all white. It is now 70% Latino. It is more diverse today than ever before. Its folks come from 5 to 7 different countries. The community has been fragmented. It still suffers from poverty. People don't trust their leaders. People don't trust organizations that are doing work there. And so the question there was, how could we help this community move forward? We were asked to work there at the height of culture wars on education. Joanne, you were a former school superintendent, right? At the height of culture wars in this country, book banning, arguments over critical race theory and DEI, right? Firing a school superintendent summarily overnight. And we were asked to help create a community-led, community-driven agenda around education. One of the ways in which people came to believe in the work was that we engaged them in a conversation about what mattered to them about their community and their kids. Not about culture wars. We didn't talk about culture wars. And what was interesting, when we asked them about community and their kids, they didn't talk about culture wars either. They came up with a 9-point education agenda. And then they were like, well, I don't believe we're going to create any change on it. So we brought people together and trained them in our approach. And 3 teams formed around some of the agenda items. English as a second language, early childhood education, after-school activities. And these teams started to produce change. And as they started to produce change, people could see proof. And as we were creating proof, we started sending signals to the larger community that something was happening. And as those signals started to get sent, more and more people started to join the effort. And by the time that the effort reached 2 years in the making, we couldn't incorporate people fast enough into the work because they realized that something different was happening, that there was something that they could believe in, that it was being created by their neighbors and other folks in the community, that they didn't hire a consultant. I'm not a consultant, by the way. They didn't hire a consultant from out of town to tell them what to do that didn't bear any relationship to their context. They were creating what needed to be done, rooted in their context, about what matters to them in their lives, and marshaling their shared resources to move forward. That gave people a sense of belief. So if you go to Reading today, if you ask them what they created together, there's a report on their website about this. They won't tell you about their strategies and initiatives and programs which they created. They did. They have transformed. They've created transformational systemic change in 2 short years in this environment. But what they will tell you is they created new ways of working together. What they will tell you is they created new bonds of trust across this community. What they will say is that there are new norms for actually having real conversations in the community about hard things, not agreeing on everything, but figuring out what they can agree on and moving forward. What they will tell you is they've created a sense of pride in this community that didn't exist before. What one woman told me who's been involved in this work, she said, this community's narrative, every community has a narrative. This community's narrative, part of it was that you should flee this community as soon as you possibly can. Now the community is, this is a great place to move to raise your kids. Think about it. This was declared the poorest community in America 10 years ago. They've created more systemic transformational change in 2 years than I've seen in any other community I've worked with. And they didn't raise a lot of money to do this. They marshaled their existing resources, they realigned them, they repurposed them. They brought people's innate capabilities together that didn't think they had anything to contribute. And they're moving forward as a community. To me, Reading is a beacon for the rest of the country of what we can do in communities and what I've seen being done in communities all across the country now. That's where belief comes from. We have to demonstrate that things can change. We can't tell people they're going to change. No one's going to believe it. And you know what? I don't think we should believe it. Last thing I'll say is we all have been sold a bill of goods by too many politicians, by too much of the news media, and too much social media in this country. We're sold a bill of goods. And I think if we want change to occur and we want to believe in it, we're going to have to create a lot of it and demonstrate that it's possible to happen again. The good news is it's happening in every community across America already. We just don't see it.
And what exactly is that bill of goods that they're selling us?
I think they're telling us this is where false hope is rooted. I think, look, I come from a political background. I worked on 20 political campaigns by the time I was 23. The last one I was an aide to a presidential candidate. And I got out of it because of the very reason I'm going to talk about, which is I think there are too many groups, not just political leaders, but too many groups in our society who tell us we're going to transform public schools in 2 years when it took a generation or more to get into this mess. It's not happening in 2 years. Everybody knows it. Why do we tell people that? We tell people, foundations and other funders tell people, we're going to give out grants in 2 years to some nonprofit, and we're going to end poverty in 2 years. We're not ending poverty in 2 years. Why do we tell people this? We have set metrics. Organizations and groups set metrics in order to raise money that suggests something's going to happen in a community and in society when we know we never should have set those metrics because we're never going to hit them. So why do we do it? We demonize people as a way to gain attention and attract money to our campaigns and to our nonprofits and other groups. But what does it do? It just increases frustration and cynicism and creates more false hope. All of these things are kind of a bill of goods, a false bill of goods, that something positive is going to happen. But actually, what's happening is that it's happening at the expense of our common interest in people. And I'm in this work because I believe people need to share a fair shake in their lives, that all of us should have a real shot at the American dream, that all of us should be able to fulfill our God-given potential. It's not going to happen when we're peddling a false bill of goods to people. So I think we've got to tell people to knock it off. I think we've got to create an alternative to it, and people are doing this all across the country. And there are really practical ways to do this.
And as you travel, we were describing a few minutes ago, going from red places to blue places to purple places, and talking about how people all over are receiving this message. But why do you think that all of these people with all of these very different beliefs and points of view, why do they seem to be so accepting of this when most of the time they're dismissing the things that they hear and the things that people want them to do?
I was just in Jim Jordan's congressional district where we've been working for 2 years, right? We co-founded the Freedom Caucus. And the reason why people are coming together and doing this there is because they believe they're losing their youth, like in a lot of communities. They believe that as they've engaged the community, what people have told them is that seniors are isolated and lonely and don't feel like they have much of a future, and they're depressed. They believe that mental health has a stigma, And so people aren't coming forward to get the mental health support that they really need. They believe that there is a hidden, and it's not so hidden anymore, drug and substance abuse and addiction problem, but that we're not as a community coming together and supporting people in recovery. And even if we support them to go into recovery, we're not supporting them when they come out of recovery. And we all know that actually to recover, to engage in recovery is a long-term process. And actually 80% of it has to do with what support networks you have, not what medical care you have, right? So it's a community problem, not a medical problem only. And so people came together across political lines. People came together across geography, urban communities, communities of 50,000 people in highly rural areas. People came together across states, faith denominations. People are coming together across income because they're realizing that the issues I just went through matter to them in their daily lives. And they want to ensure that their community can thrive. And when focused on these issues, as opposed to culture war issues and the political issues we hear about every day in our country, they do care about their neighbors. They do care about one another. They do care about a sense of belonging. They do care, not everyone, but enough people care about not having people left out and left behind. And so people are coming together and they're producing change around these areas I just mentioned in a community that, for some of us at least, might believe that people just not want to engage in this kind of work, but they do. We just did a lab in Fort Collins, Colorado, which is the home of Lauren Boebert. They've come together across dividing lines and are working on these issues. So for those folks who tell me we are too polarized to do this work together, what I would say is we suffer from a problem of fight or flight in our country. But when people come together and they feel safe enough to talk about these things, and we focus on what matters to them, not political debates, and we take it out of a political context and put it into a what matters to us as people context, people do come together across dividing lines. And they will work together, and they are working together, and they are producing change. And I think that's our path. That's part of the path we need to take forward. So long as we insist on politicizing everything that we're talking about, we will be stuck in the morass that we're now in as a country. And increasingly, people will pull back even more, and our anxiety will increase even more, and our sense of fear will deepen even more. And that's the recipe for a country not thriving, but a country in decline.
In all the years that I've known you, one of your themes has always been and continues to be talking about the difference between false hope and authentic hope. What does that mean?
Well, it's all the things I was talking about before about peddling a false bill of goods. I think authentic hope, we've done, so I've now written 9 books. I think 6 of them have the word hope somewhere in the title or subtitle. I'm deeply, I actually believe that hope ultimately is the currency of life. And what people really want to know is, can tomorrow be better than today? And I think we all want to as human beings. And so we've done a lot of formal rigorous research on what engenders hope in people. We've also done all this work on the ground all across America and other places. And what we keep finding are similar things, and it's not that complicated. People want to know that what matters to them matters to us, right? That they're part of something larger than themselves. People want to know that the challenges that we're facing, that we will talk about them, not because we believe that things will be solved overnight, but because our reality is actually being put on the table and we're making a go of something. People want to know that we're not going to solve problems overnight because no one believes we are. And I'm convinced we can't. But people do want to know that we're making progress. So they want to see signs of progress along the way. People gain authentic hope when we set realistic expectations and when we hit them, when we deliver on them. So as a country, if we really were interested in engendering belief and hope, we would set expectations we actually can hit, maybe with a large vision, but with short and medium term expectations that we can actually hit, because demonstrating that we can hit them is part of engendering belief and hope. People gain hope when they see that we're tapping our innate capabilities and that we all have something to offer and that we're coming together to do it, not in a kumbaya way. Believe me, I hope there's nothing I've said tonight that makes you believe I believe in sitting around a circle and holding hands. And the work that's required is hard. It's messy. It takes time. There are no guarantees. Lots of folks don't want to engage in it. They want to resist. They want to sabotage it. They want to undermine it. I say that from experience. There's no free ride here. I just said to someone over here, I've got a lot of stars to show for all the work that I've been doing for the last 4 years. This is not easy. But what I know, what I've come to learn, not what I believe, what I've come to learn is that people gain authentic hope when enough of us, just enough of us, step forward and find ways to work together and start to make some progress. And then more people join. That's how all significant change, or much of the significant change in American history came from. So I think we face a choice. Hope is a verb, it's obviously a noun, but it's a verb. It's something we can create together. It's something that can only be created together in civic life, in public life. And I think we face a fundamental choice, and it's not that complicated. Do we want to keep pursuing false hope in the name of our own interests, in the name of our own organization, in the name of political leaders that we're electing at the expense of our common interests? Or do we want to make the choice and at least work at creating authentic hope? That's going to require a mindset and behavior shift on a lot of our parts. And I think that's part of what we need to focus on.
In all the years I've known you, I've never seen you sit in a circle and hold hands, so that's.
This is my we were just talking about grandchildren, maybe my granddaughter, but that's about it.
So a lot of people who came here tonight, I'm grateful that they did. They came most likely not knowing anything about the Harwood Institute or maybe ever reading anything that you've written. So for all of those people who came here tonight and who will hopefully walk home with one of your books, this book, what about this do you want them to know that they will learn about the Harwood Institute and about its work when they do?
Look, as a board member, you may not appreciate my answer. I don't really care if you know very much about the Harwood Institute. I'd love for you to go to our website and look at the work that we do. I'd love for you to join us in this work. I'd love for you to go to our school. But really, when you read this book or come away from tonight, most of all, what I hope you take away is that there's a practical path forward for us as people and in this country. This new civic path I'm talking about is rooted in the notion that we've got to turn outward toward one another. That the only way that we can see and hear one another, the only way in which we can uplift one another's dignity is to be turned outward toward one another. That's an orientation, a posture, a disposition. So much mitigates against that in our society today. So much. Second, what I hope you remember is that we've got to figure out what we can agree on amid our real differences. There are differences. They shouldn't be sugarcoated. We shouldn't pretend they don't exist. But I'll be damned if that's where we're going to live all our life. There are enough things we can agree on that we've got to discover in each community that we can work on together, like they are in Union County, Ohio, Jim Jordan's congressional district, in Selma, Alabama, where we're doing work, in Alamance County, North Carolina, in Owensboro, Kentucky, in Northern California, where there are militia, where we're doing work. We can do this, but we're gonna have to commit to figuring out what we can agree on amid our differences and focus on that, and not insist on just focusing on the things that we disagree on. We've got to get in motion and build things together. Talking about all this stuff alone is not going to get us where we need to go. I've got colleagues who spend their entire lives just saying we need to bridge our differences. Talk to each other, like we're all in marriage counseling together. But even if you've been in marriage counseling, you know that ultimately someone has to take action in the marriage. It's not enough to sort of counseling. You have to do something. And in doing something, you create belief. And in communities, it's the same thing. We've got to build together. We've got to be creators together, producers together, innovators together, to show that we can actually come together and build something. And in building something, we rediscover our individual and shared agency in a society where we feel like we've lost control. Agency is really critical right now. And we also rediscover that we have innate capabilities, and we also rediscover our shared humanity along the way. And then the other thing I hope you'll remember is that we've got to make visible the change we're creating. There's so many good things already happening in so many communities, in every community I work with, and in every community I don't work with. There's so many good things already happening, but they're invisible to us, right? The noise from the media and everything else is crowding it out and overshadowing it. Social media is taking us down rabbit holes. The people who are doing the work are so busy doing the work, they don't even see what they're creating half the time. So I think we have a tool called making the invisible visible to help people reveal the change they're creating and the progress they're making along the way so that they can lift it up, not because they're done with the work, because the work's just beginning, but so that we can actually see that we're making progress, and in doing so, engender belief in ourselves and one another that we can move forward together, not as Republicans or Democrats, as Americans. So I don't give a lick if you know anything about the Institute. What I do care about is that you still hold some modicum of belief that we can move forward in our communities and in this country, notwithstanding the real challenges that we face. And that maybe, just maybe, as you're doing this work, you'll join with even more people to help us move forward, because I think we need more people pulling in a common direction, marshaling our shared resources, so that all of us can be part of this American experiment, not just some of us. And I think that's really critical.
Well, as a board member, I love that answer.